Welcome to the next SuperGen Offshore Renewable Energy Hub webinar. Really delighted to have you all here today. This is our third webinar. These run every couple of weeks, and today I'm delighted that we have Beth Scott and Ariana Zampola from the University of Aberdeen, who are going to talk to us about the impacts of wind energy extraction on the physics and in Scottish shelf waters. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over. First of all, we're going to have a talk from Beth, who will introduce herself and then talk about the PELAgIO project. And if I can just remind everybody, we're going to have two presentations today. We'll take any questions immediately after the presentations, and you have different options of how you can do that. You can put your questions into the chat as you're thinking of them while you're listening to the talk. And at the end of the talks, then we'll invite you to use the raise hand function and ask any questions you have. Okay, so thank you very much, and over to you, Beth.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully my screen is coming up. And the slideshow is there. So yes, my name's Beth Scott. I'm one of the co-directors of SuperGen, and I'm also a PI of a new project or newish project in the ECOWind group called PELAgIO, which is a physics to ecosystem level assessment of impacts of offshore wind farms. And it's a rather large NERC, Crown Estate, and DIFRA project. And we have quite a few partners, project partners and academic partners. And the best way to look at that, who all is involved, and the fact there's a lot of people that have been involved in SuperGen and are now going to also be involved in SuperGen, including Ariana Zampola, who's going to come after me, and I'll show you what an integral part of the PELAgIO project she is. That's also going to then come over into working with SuperGen. So what happens in ECOWind was there were three big areas that we needed to fulfill for these NERC grants. And the first one was this observing of interactions of species and population dynamics. So really getting out there and understanding what the heck is happening in our oceans when we put in all these new structures. And so what we decided to do in PELAgIO is why it's called PELAgIO, is we're really looking then at the physical effects. And we're looking in particular at primary production and ocean health. And we're doing it in these three different spatial ways, locally, regionally, and shelf-wide. And we're putting it into the context of climate change, looking at that counterfactual. What we're also doing then in work package 2, where we're looking at what they were asking us to do, is using new enhanced marine observations, i.e. lots of autonomous things to go out there and do this well. And in what we're going to do then is really try to understand predator-prey interactions. So using a lot of active acoustics, we're looking at fish availability, and also some of the tagging of fish with new tags, where we can really look at the behavior in more detail. So those two things are working together. And then in area 3, we're trying to bring it all together to inform policy and really look at management strategies. And there we're using these ecosystem level models that actually we perfected we made in SuperGen 1, working with Netta Trifonova, who was a postdoc in SuperGen 1. And so we'll go into that in a second, but what I wanted to show very quickly here, because what I'm just doing is giving a rapid overview of PELAgIO and what we've been up to. And I'm going to pass over to Ariana, who's going to give a really detailed look at the effects of extraction of wind. So what we've been up to last summer is we put out a whole bunch of these shiny gliders, and I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the purple and green are where the gliders went back and forth from April to August. We also went around in some surveys where we put the gliders in, doing all kinds of CTDs and bird watching. And then we also put in 3 moorings, 3 different types of moorings to look at the physics that's happening there, lots of the biology, but also the fish. So one of the WBAT, we're calling it, one of the moorings we actually then put into the tidal wake of one of the turbines and moved it from 500 to 50 meters in the second half. While we were out there last summer, what we hit was the heat wave, which was really, really toe curling, with temperatures more than 5 degrees warmer at the surface. Luckily, the bottom temperatures didn't go up that much at all, but there were some really big differences then when the top layer seals off like that and you don't have as much dissolved oxygen coming through So what we're going to do with all this information is we're going to eventually go up to this really large scale using these shelf sea models, the FECOM models, and we're going to eventually look at this large scale. And how we're doing it, though, to get there is we're looking at this finer scale. So this is opening up on the sea green that we're working with directly, and looking at the fact that we'll have basically a turbine in each of our nodes. And so this is what Ariana is going to talk about today then, is what happens when we extract that energy. What happens actually to the water column just underneath it, and what happens to it both biologically and physically. We're also, of course, looking at what happens to drag in this system, and that's some of our other colleagues doing that. We're, of course, going to put those two things together. So what we also do then, like I said, we went around in boats and we collected all kinds of data. And this is our EK60, our downward facing acoustic information that we can look at where fish schools are, and we can map them against where we've seen a lot of seabirds, but also what kind of physics is going on in those areas. And then we put this upward facing WBET I was talking about, where we left it for a long time, so that you're seeing your diurnal cycles of animals, what you expect to see going up and down. But actually things changed a lot in the heat wave, and we're digging into that. Like I said, we're also then tagging birds. So the RSPB are the ones doing this, and this is some of the very preliminary tracks from these ones, and so that you see that we've got quite good overlap in the areas where birds have tagged into the area we're studying. And so what we're trying to do there, just to explain it a little bit more, and I hope the pictures explain this really quite well, is we understand physics to fish. We kind of we think we can get there quite quickly and understand, what fish are reacting to in terms of physics. Understanding birds to fish is much harder. You need a lot more data. So what we're hoping to get to is being able to just go straight from the physics up to the seabirds. And then finally, what we're doing with our work package 3 is we're taking the wonderful models that we produced in SuperGen 1, these ecosystem models that are Bayesian approaches, so they're pattern-led, they're the machine learning. And essentially, this is one example where we've gone back and looked at just the area of the map you see on the left here, where we're doing some scenario tests of what happens when you take fishing out of these areas. And what we had to do first is do things like just test, how can we predict cod? And what's really come out really interesting is that cod are predicted, the recruitment of cod is what's being shown on this graph, really well by just 3 variables. That's the mixed layer depth, the maximum chlorophyll level that you'll hear a lot about from Ariana, and the landings of demersal fish, with the chlorophyll level actually being the biggest driver here. And so what we can do is we can predict quite well with these variables. And so what we can do now, and what we've been doing, is working directly with the fishing industry to see what happens when we take fishing out of this system, and we look at different types of gear uses, i.e. not allowing mobile gear into any floating wind in this area, and so on. We've also talked a lot to the fishermen and got a lot of answers about what they think is going to happen. And we've done this with this survey from PML, and we actually just had a workshop a couple of weeks ago in London. Really interesting responses. And finally, then we're putting that all together from the ecosystem models all the way up to what's called natural capital, where we can actually sort of cost out what these changes in the physics all the way up through to all of the predators and prey and fishing industry are going to actually cost in terms of ecological costs that can be translated into finance. So that's us in a nutshell in PELAgIO. And so I'm going to end my slides there and stop sharing. And just see if there's any quick questions on that before I pass over to Ariana. Okay, I think it would be great possibly if we just then, that was very rapid go through. We'll pass now over to Ariana.
Thank you, Beth. I'm gonna share my slides. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. I'm Arianna Zampollo. I'm a postdoc at the University of Aberdeen, and I work in SuperGen and PELAgIO projects. And I'm also working with the Marine Directorate, in particular with Rory O'Hara-Murray, William McDonald, and Alejandro Gallego. And so my PhD was investigating the impact of offshore wind farms on the physics and primary production using oceanographic and biogeochemical models. And my postdoc will be develop these models to include these wind turbines and wind farms in order to assess these effects on the physics and primary production. So today I'm gonna talk briefly about where and when we find primary production in the seascape. And with primary production here, I mean mainly phytoplankton. And I've been focusing, mainly on phytoplankton. And then I will talk what has been described in literature so far. So how the wind farm can impact primary production and the physics. And then I will show you our case study in the Firth of Forth and Tyne region, so in the waters of Edinburgh, and what we discovered in that area with modeled data, and then some conclusions on these potential effects. Okay, so this is an image that you, of course, have seen already many times. It's a satellite image, a composite satellite image from Ocean Color, which is a NASA product. And it shows basically where the regions are most productive, where we can find most of the production of phytoplankton, looking at just chlorophyll. And you can see that the darker colors, like the red and green, comes from regions that are shelf, basically continental shelf waters, but also they bloom in the northern or in the southern hemisphere. But if we look closer to the North Sea, this is an image from NEODAS. It's a satellite image from the spring bloom, which happened between April and May, and it's showing that most of the production is actually occurring in the continental shelf, which we know will be quite occupied by offshore wind farms from different arrays. And so we are actually interested in understanding what could be the potential impacts on the primary production. And we know that shelf seas play a significant role in the global cycling of carbon, and they contribute up to 30% of the marine primary production. So, however, this is a satellite image, and those satellites are very good at capturing the chlorophyll concentration in the water column. We have to remember that the water, the seas, are three-dimensional environments, and depending on where we are in the year, we will have a different vertical distribution of these chlorophyll concentrations. So in this study, for example, in the Celtic Sea, we have a clear vertical distribution of chlorophyll at the subsurface, between 20 and 50 meters depth. And sometimes these values, this concentration, cannot be captured by satellites, for example. So we actually need in situ, observations from in situ, and also model that are performing well and predicting both in the temporal and spatial scale. So this is called the phenology of the phytoplankton, different phytoplankton groups. So basically from January to December, when we find most of the production, and in seasonally stratified water in temperate seas, so for example in the North Sea, we have mixed waters in winter, and these waters start to stratify, and then we get a phytoplankton bloom, which is mainly made of diatoms in this region. And what happened is that in the water column, these diatoms distribute quite close to the sea surface. And after the phytoplankton bloom in summer, when the water is quite well stratified, the chlorophyll mainly distribute at the subsurface, and it create these profiles of chlorophyll concentrations that you can get from CTD observations, and they are quite influenced by different forces like tidal cycles, the amount of nutrients, and like the wind stress at the sea surface. But what we actually see is that during summer we have most of the concentration at the subsurface, and this is important for the other elements of the trophic chain, like fish and predators. I think about seabirds. They need to predict where these patches of chlorophyll, like patches of food, they distribute in the water column and how they can reach them. So the subsurface distribution depends, as I said, on different factors. It depends on the density profiles, because chlorophyll, those are phytoplankton cells, so they are basically passively drifted. But they need to be in a certain layer where they can get enough light and nutrients to grow. So to repeat a bit myself, but to try to be clear, if we look at a density profile, which is this black line, we have mixing at the subsurface and mixing at the surface. This is what happens when the water column is stratified for like long period of time. And then we have this subsurface concentration of chlorophyll, and this is surviving because it has nutrients coming from the deeper layer, and may also survive because there is a kind of a mixing coming from the wind stress at the surface. And this is called the maximum chlorophyll A depth. And depending on the phytoplankton cells are distributing in the water column, they can reach different nutrients and light. And so there will be species that compete better than others. And so we will find more dinoflagellates or diatoms. And if we look at the North Sea, the North Sea can be classified in different hydrodynamic regimes. So in seasonally stratified waters, which is in green here, those waters, as I said before, they become stratified in April, May, and they remain stratified for the season, the summer season. And so we will find more, for example, diatoms or dinoflagellate in certain months. But if we move to more mixed waters, the situation can be quite different. We can find chlorophyll mainly at the surface or even in the whole water column if the depth is quite shallow. And this can be characterized mainly by diatoms. So this to say that there are different factors that can describe the primary production, and we have to consider a very dynamic. This is a very dynamic system that like change in time and space, and so the effect of offshore wind farms can be investigated from different points of view. So a part of my study during my PhD was trying to characterize which variables are defining the subsurface concentration. And what I've discovered is that most of the depth of the maximum chlorophyll, so most of the concentration is actually developing near the base of the pycnocline, so near the base of this gradient change. And we get deeper subsurface concentration when we have stronger wind speed. And this makes sense because the wind stress is pushing down and creating more mix at the surface, so it's pushing down the pycnocline and the subsurface concentration of chlorophyll. But also we get this subsurface concentration in deeper waters up to 100 meters, but not very, very stratified, because when the waters become highly stratified, they also become oligotrophic. There are no nutrients anymore because most of the phytoplankton that was living there used most of the nutrients that were available in the euphotic zone. So if you think about these variables, these are also describing areas where the offshore wind farms will be deployed. So regions with average annual wind speed of 10 meters per second are excellent for wind farm deployments. But these wind farm deployments are gonna impact the pycnocline, the stratification, and the wind stress and the mixing at the surface. So we need to think about the impact on primary production. So I'm gonna talk about the what is known in the literature and what has been described as an impact of wind farms in the hydrodynamic processes. But first, I want to show this very interesting study that modeled the potential impact, the direct impact of wind farms on primary production. In fact, the foundation of the wind turbines act as a new subsurface where epistructural muscles, for example, can grow, and these grazers of phytoplankton has shown to decrease the amount of concentration of chlorophyll near the wind farms, and the decrease was around 8% of the biomass. So we are aware of this direct effect, but there are also other indirect effects. And I have classified these two effects in two main groups. So we have the effect coming from the turbine foundation and the effect coming from the windmill. So the turbine foundation acts as an obstacle. And if we have a tidal stream coming from this direction, we will have an increase of turbulence downstream. While the turbine mile will extract energy from the system, and therefore the wind speed will be reduced downwind, and also the temperature is going to increase at the sea surface. So I'm going to go more into the details of these two. There are some observations coming from satellite and SAR images. So this satellite image is showing the turbine wakes. So it's the wake of the turbulence coming from the turbine foundation. So we have probably a tidal stream current coming from south. And these lighter colors are representing the resuspension of sediments from the seabed. So there is an increase of turbulence downstream. While this image is a SAR image from the German seas, and is showing the wind wake. And the wind wake is this darker region here coming from the wind farm, where the wind speed is actually reduced. So repeating myself again a little bit, but this is these two are one of the main papers that have been published describing the effect of the turbine foundation. If we have a stratified water column, and we have a tidal stream coming from this direction, what happens is that this stratification that should be here will actually be disturbed. And we will have an increase of turbulence, and we wonder what could be the effect on primary production. Obviously, this effect of the turbine foundation change depending on the type of foundation. Most of the observation have been conducted in the southern North Sea, where there are monopiles, and there is a lack of information coming from the jacket foundation or even floating foundations that will be deployed in deeper waters that are also more stratified and probably will have different effects. So there is a difference of arrays, but also difference of environments where they will be deployed, and a difference of effects they can have on the phytoplankton production. Regarding the wind wake, there are a bit more information, both in situ observations and models. And so that's why also we focused on modeling the wind wake in our case study and addressing the effect on primary production. But this is another study from the German group showing wind wakes from different and many wind farms. But again, this is has been done in the southern North Sea that we have seen is quite mixed and may have a different effect from the North Sea, northern North Sea. This is a study from Carranza. It doesn't include any wind farm effect, but it's quite interesting because it describes what is the effect of the wind on the density profiles in blue and on the chlorophyll profiles in green. And they were describing how windstorms are actually triggering small phytoplankton blooms. There are not the spring blooms, so the big spring bloom, but they occur during summer. And they are quite important for other species to pinpoint where the food resources are and to gather a lot of food in that moment, like specifically in summer when the conditions are oligotrophic, there is not much food. So wind can also regulate the amount of chlorophyll, and it's quite important in regulating the food resources. And in the North Sea, we have also the tidal cycle, which is also kind of regulating the amount of resources in specific hotspot. So now I'm gonna show you one of the main effects that have been described regarding the wind wake, and this has been described by Ludwig in 2015. And what is also it's been seen from the models, like larger scale models, like in our model and also other models in the Southern North Sea. And basically, what he described is that a region where the wind speed is reduced is also a region where the Ekman transport is adjusted and reduced. And this reduction is causing a dipole, the creation of dipoles. And these two regions, quite close to each other, are characterized one by downwelling and one by upwelling fluxes. So these downward and upward fluxes are quite they're not super strong. They can change the vertical distribution of the pycnocline, but are still able to trigger new production or negatively impact production in certain areas. And these two regions are characterized, for example, the downwelly region is characterized by warm and fresh waters coming from the surface, while the upward fluxes will bring more nutrient-enriched waters from the subsurface into the pycnocline and the euphotic zone. And one of the study from Dowell et al., it actually showed that there is a different, a change in the mixer layer depth, and the mixer layer depth is where the pycnocline, so the point that divide the surface mixing and the pycnocline, and this change in the mixer layer depth is also affecting the change in the annual net primary production in this central and southern North Sea. However, what I've said so far is that the wind wake is a region where the wind speed is reduced, we have less wind stress and with less surface mixing. But what we know from the turbine foundation is that the turbine foundation will increase the mixing, and especially floating wind farm wind turbines will probably increase quite a lot the mixing, the local mixing, and they will do it within the pycnocline where the subsurface chlorophyll is setting. And this will probably increase the nutrient flux and therefore the chlorophyll concentration at the subsurface. So these two effects can add up and be positively impacting chlorophyll, but they can also be antagonist. And it is very important to address this effect together for future studies. So coming back to my study and what we have done in the Scottish waters, as I've shown, most of the studies have been conducted in this region here, which you can see is characterized by more mixed waters, so intermittently stratified or permanently mixed waters due to the tidal current from the English Channel. Why we decided to model the Firth of Forth entire region, because we had data from 2003 that could validate our models. And we also know that this area is very important for seabirds and fisheries, and there will be also many wind farms deployed in that area. So these results in the bank here and in the German waters described an increase in primary production. These waters are quite shallow. They can, I think, reach up to 40 meters, but they have found out an increase of primary production in waters around 25 meters. So we wonder what is actually going on in deeper waters, like in the Firth of Forth. So we used an AFICOM model, which is an oceanographic model coupled to a biogeochemical model, DSM, and this has been done by Rory from the Marine Directorate. And we looked at, so we used a mesh that was going from 70 to 70 meters to 4 kilometers. But in the areas of the wind turbines in the wind farm, we have a resolution of around like 500 meters, like moving between 300 and 500 meters to 1 kilometer, actually, in this area here. And we included the effect of the wind farm by parameterizing the wake effect on the atmospheric forcing. So we did not include the effect of the wind turbine foundation, but we just took some data on the wake length and the deficit of the speed from wind farms coming from observations, and then we tried to include them in the atmospheric forcing. So we follow a paper from Christensen et al. That is basically parameterizing the deficit using two equations, and we said that most of the deficit, so most of the wind speed was reduced within the wind farm, and the wind speed was recovering from the wind farm to the edge of the wind wake. But also the reduction was higher in the center of the wake and was recovering at the edge of the wake. And so combining these two equations together will give you this final wind wake, which has the maximum reduction of wind speed at the center of the wake and within the wind farm. So our results, I'm gonna go to the results now. These are in preparation, so they've not been published yet, but we're gonna submit very soon. And I'm gonna go from a large temporal and spatial scale to a very small temporal and spatial scale. So this is the amount of chlorophyll from March to the end of June that occurred in the whole domain and has been summed up in the water column. So it's the total amount of chlorophyll. And the blue line is the baseline model, and the red line is the model with the wind farm. And in this plot here, there is shown the difference between the concentrations of these two models. And as you can see, during the bloom phase, which is in the red rectangle here, we don't have, it seems like there is a switch of the phytoplankton bloom, but actually what happens is that while the phytoplankton is kicking off, like the bloom is kicking off, in the scenario of the wind farm, there is a reduction of production. We still have the phytoplankton bloom kicking off, but the concentration is lower compared to the model without the wind farm. And so we have a larger variation during the bloom, and then smaller variations like going up and down during summer. So when the certification is settled and phytoplankton is at the subsurface. But overall, during these 4 months, we have a reduction of 7% of the primary production. So if we look at the spatial variation of chlorophyll during these 3 different periods, so before bloom, during bloom, and post-bloom, what we can see is that, again, most of the variation occurred during the bloom. If we look at the color bar, the scale of the changes, but the differences are more equal in the post-bloom. So we have as much as increase and as much as decrease. And this makes sense because we have seen before that during the post-bloom, we don't have a very much, like if you look at the whole region, there is not much difference. But if we look at the spatial variation, there is a kind of a quite difference between regions. So we had an increase near coastline and a decrease offshore. And this pattern is evident during the whole phytoplankton, during the three phases. So we have an increase near shore between the wind farm and the coastline, and a decrease offshore. So then what we have done is looking at which are the variables and the physical variables that are affecting these two conditions. And I'm going into details a little bit, but not extremely into details. But to summarize, the two main factors that are affecting these two conditions are the stratification and the bathymetry, which is also linked to the stratification. So what we have seen is that in shallow waters, they are usually more mixed. We have an increase of primary production because we have also an increase in stratification. And this is what was shown also in the southern North Sea. So what happened is that the water is like, we don't have a lot of mixing coming from the tidal current and the wind speed, and therefore phytoplankton can settle, it's not flushed away, it can stay in the area, it has enough nutrients, and coming from the runoff of these rivers, it has enough nutrients, and it can bloom, it can grow. But what happens offshore, that in those areas that are already quite stratified, is that when we increase stratification, we also increase oligotrophic conditions. We have less nutrient coming from the upward mixing, coming from the bottom mixing. And this is causing a decrease of chlorophyll during summer, when we have usually subsurface concentrations. So what we have done is then looking at hydrodynamic regimes. So these points here are all the units of the mesh that showed a change in the hydrodynamic regime between basin and wind farm. So during, like in the scenario without wind farm, what we have is mainly intermittently stratified conditions. So in blue, those are areas where the stratification occur for 2 weeks of time, and then there is a mixing of the whole water column. And in green, the stratification occur for a month, and then we have a mixing of the water column. So, but what happened when we model with the wind farm is that these offshore area increased a lot its stratification, and therefore the stratification remained for longer, it lasted for longer, and therefore it was lasting for the whole 3 months or 2 months that we investigated. And if we look at chlorophyll, then we can see that those regions, I mean, not all of them, because it depends also on local conditions, but most of the region where that became more stratified, they also became less productive, which is the opposite near shore, where the increase of stratification caused an increase also in the production. So what we have done after was selecting 2 period of time, and I'm going to show you just one, but period of time where we have prevailing wind direction. And so we selected 12 hours of time where the wind was blowing from southwest. And what you can see here is that during these 12 hours, the dipoles developed between the wind farm, the coastline, and offshore waters. And this is a salinity, it's a map showing the the change in salinity, so a decrease in blue and an increase in red. And where we have a decrease in salinity is also the region of downwelling, while the increase in salinity show a region of upwelling. And we took a transect, which is this line here, and we looked at the changes in temperature, salinity, chlorophyll, and stratification. So on this side of the plot, you will see the baseline conditions, so what was happening before the wind farm, and then in blue and red, the conditions when we included wind farm, so the changes in these 4 factors. And what has been to summarize what we have found is that within the wind farm, which is between these 2 dashed lines, we have a decrease in wind speed, and what is generating is a downwelling dipole. But because the reduced wind speed at the surface is causing an increase in sea surface temperature, this because the water from the Ekman transport is not transported away, it remains more in the area, so it becomes also warmer. This increase in temperature at the surface, this decrease in salinity at the surface is actually causing an increase of stratification. And more stratified waters near the coastline caused an increase in primary production. The opposite condition happened just after, on the side of the wind farm. So if we go outside the wind farm where the upwelling region is developing, we had a decrease of primary production because this area is more stratified, because it's more stratified than the other areas within the wind farm and near the coastline. And here still the certification increased because of it's driven by the temperature. The temperature at the surface was increasing, and the upward fluxes are not strong enough. Or they are starting to develop, but they develop farther away, and so the certification increase, and we still have this caused a decrease in the subsurface concentration. But what is happening far from the wind farm is that an upward fluxes managed to develop, and in this region where we have fresher water and salty water, we also have seen a decrease in potential energy anomaly in stratification, and this enhanced the primary production at the subsurface. So what I want to say is that the dipoles overlap with changes in chlorophyll, and these are also linked to the stratification of these regions, and therefore dipoles are affecting the amount of chlorophyll and the spatial variation of chlorophyll, as well as they are affecting the certification. Okay, so to conclude, we can say that the wake effect from offshore wind farms are changing the primary production over space and time. There is an increase of stratification in shallow and deep waters. And this increase of stratification has having different effects, an increase on the chlorophyll, an increase in shallow waters and a decrease in deeper waters. And these variations can occur also quite far from the wind farms. Obviously, these analyses can be improved. We can look at turbine foundations. But what we can also do, and what will be part of my job in SuperGen, is scaling down the wake effect at the level of the turbine. So these green crosses are the single turbines within the wind farms in sea green. And what we want to do is developing the wind wake at the level of the turbine, because we can also combine that with the effect of the turbine foundation, which is which is actually performed at the level of the turbine as well. But also the wind wake changes based on atmospheric conditions, and it affects not only the wind speed, but again the temperature, and this has not been included yet in our models. And like modeling at the level of the turbine is quite computational demanding, and therefore it needs more thinking and developing, but will improve more the understanding of dipoles and changes in the chlorophyll concentrations. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ariana. So it's a huge amount of information. And so we encourage people actually to come in and use the chat facility here to give us questions. Hopefully it's not been too much of an overload of information there. It's very detailed, but it's also this connection between the physics to the biology, to the primary production, the lowest bit of the food chain that we hope to bring over and work very much with the engineering group here in SuperGen, and especially with Tim Stallard and Richard Wielden, and looking at CFD modeling and how we can bring that type of modeling up to the scale at which Ariana is working. So I don't know if you want to stop sharing screen, and we'll see if we've got any messages in the chat. Not yet, I think. But I just want to say then that also, we do have one from Deborah. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Okay, sorry, somebody else has also got a question. But yeah, just a quick one. I thank you so much, because I think that was a really nice explanation. I can't say I fully understand still, but I think I got the impression there that from the study you've done based on the wake effect, that the stratification is increased in both shallower water and deeper water. So what do you expect to see from the interaction with the turbines, with the foundation structures, and will that reduce the amount of stratification?
Yeah. So again, it's not increasing everywhere. It's increasing in some spots. And I just presented the effect on chlorophyll, where it's increasing in both conditions. I guess with the turbine foundation, we will have more turbulence, and therefore it will impact negatively the stratification. We have lower less stratified waters. But I think it's also a matter of the directions. So like the tidal the direction of the tidal current and the direction of the wind speed. And then if they are actually overlapping or like not overlapping. So I think, yeah, there are different scenarios. They can increase both increase certification, or like both decrease it. I don't know. Yeah, something like that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's very complicated. So that's why you need to go to a individual turbine level model, is it?
Yes, that's an idea. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really interesting. Sorry, Beth, you're gonna.
Yeah, go ahead. And so yes, exactly that. We're going to try this summer to put our ADCP upward facing moorings in both the tidal wake and the wind wake. And hopefully the wind plays ball this year and goes where it's supposed to go as a prevailing wind, which it didn't do last year. Okay, I see we've got questions coming in. And do we also have someone online? Is that Jinjeng? Would you like to ask a question? You can go ahead.
Okay, yeah, great talk, Ariana. And yeah, it's super interesting. And I'm currently actually doing a lot of work on the wind farm wake modeling, but we are more interested in the previously work is more interested in the power generation side. And it's super interesting to see your results. And I'm wondering, like, since you also mentioned in your very last slides about incorporation of atmospheric conditions and incoming flow turbulence with wake modeling. So considering, for example, CFD simulations, or because it's currently a rather simple analytical model, right? So yeah, it's would be interested to see other options since you mentioned CFD modeling and also middle fidelity. So my question is that currently you are just using the wind speed reduction at hub height to estimate the surface stress. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. So what we've done is taken, you mean atmospheric wind speed at hub height?
Yeah, and you observe with weak model that a reduction at hub height. How do you like interpolate it into?
Yes.
But how do you like interpolate from hub height to the surface stress?
Oh, yeah, it's quite simple. We just have taken wind speed at so the hub height is 100 meter, if I remember. We took wind speed at 10 meter from ERA 5. So those are data available from Copernicus, and we imagined that the wind reduction was at that height, like 10 meters. It's not interpolated, but that's something that we can discuss together. And I know also like your results can be very, very your study from also the previous webinar and what we talked about can be very useful to make this system more realistic.
Yeah, it's a great point because for example, the one I've seen the one side images for wind farm weeks. That one actually estimates the images at about 10 meters above water levels. So actually, if one is using ERA5 data for estimating 10-meter wind speed, then that's already like potentially already under weeks impact. So it would be very interested to have a say 3D, for example, three-dimensional weak model that can directly estimate the surface stress. Because also another point is that it not only depends on the inflow atmospheric stability, it also kind of like change the turbulence profiles. That's also another aspect I'm wondering. Do you think that the turbulence, because weak is characterized by both a reduced wind speed and also increased turbulence level? Do you think the increased turbulence level in the wind also have some kind of effects on the primary production, or is a minor effects?
No, absolutely. I think it will have an impact. Again, we don't know what's the threshold, like if depends on how much turbulence is produced, I guess. But near, I think there is also very much interest to understand what is going on near the single turbines for fisheries and like for top predators, understanding the impact on top predators. And the increase of turbulence near the turbine because of the turbine foundation and the wind energy extraction is very much important. So I think it has to be further investigated.
Okay. Thank you. It's really a great talk.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So if we go over to the questions here, we've got one from Di Hong, who's asking, if you were to make an educated guess, would you see similar effects in tidal mixing fronts, such as the Flamber front, where Hornsea is located, so farther down the east coast? So I think it very much depends on exactly the depth and the tidal speeds there. The Flamber front is a very productive front, but it's a very complex area as well there. So do you have a best guess of that?
Sorry, I don't know where is this front. Apologies. But I guess, so what is important, I think for me, what was important to understand is how the hydrodynamic condition changes after the wind farm deployments. So what we know from Ludwig 2015 is that the wind farm are gonna change the position of the front, the thermal front, because it's changing the surface temperature. So it probably will have an effect on the front, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really complex area, and we do hope to model some of that area much later in the project. So we will get there. And next question then from Daniel, who seems to be a biologist, says, very interesting talk. I'm wondering, how do you assess plankton growth using satellite in situ sampling, both, or what? Thank you.
So this model, so the model we used is an oceanographic model coupled to biogeochemical model, and they were validated using in situ observation collected with CTD, and so therefore we validated our ERSM output, and then we looked at the variation within the model. I guess if you want to look at effects of phytoplankton growth from offshore wind farms, you can do from satellite, but you need to know the limitations of satellite, and you can do from in situ sampling, but like both have limitations, and models are a good way of combining them to get like more precise, like more high resolution in space and time. That's
excellent. And Daniel also asks if you've considered any impact on the zooplankton communities and relative abundance.
Yeah. So another, so for example, yeah, there must be an impact on zooplankton. I don't know much about zooplankton, to be honest, but there is a study from Dowell et al. 2022 that I put in my slides, and they also presented some results on the grazers. And there is a variation in those, all coming from models, obviously.
And I can answer a little too then on within what we're doing right now in PELAgIO with the ecosystem models we built in SuperGen phase 1 is we put them into the ecosystem model. So when we see those changes in plankton, we've got several different functional groups of zooplankton, 4 different functional groups, and we look then at what those changes, those predicted changes will do to the changes in zooplankton. And indeed, yes, the model tells us there will be some big changes. So that is, there's actually a scenarios paper that's just been published with Neda Trifonova as the first author just a few months ago. I can put that in chat in a minute. So we've got another question here from Lillian. She says, thanks for the talk. For your main plot of the transect cross wind farm, did you run an ADCP as well to account for tidal current? And also, was the other data collected using CTD stations or by other means? So I think, yes, go ahead then. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, Ariana.
Sorry. Do you want to go first, Beth?
Yeah, sure. What I'm saying is yes, for the transects, no, we didn't run ADCP. We have got real ADCP data now for the sea green area that we're still processing. And but for the areas where Ariana was talking about how we validated, it was a scanfish we used, so that we're running that almost continuously. You're never more than about 400 meters apart in your V shapes for that. But I'm not sure if we completely answered the question there, because we know the FECOM should account for the tidal currents, correct, Ariana?
Yes. Yeah, so again, that's a transect on the model. Like I just took a transect from the model output, and yeah, the model was validated with CTD station, like the floating ups and down. Yeah, CTD station. Sorry, CTD. Sorry, Lillian, I'm not sure I've answered. Thanks.
Okay, I think we've run out of questions and we've run out of time, so it's just perfect. Thank you very much again, Arian, and thank you, Deborah and Lee and Co. For hosting us at SuperGen, and know that all of this work will be integrated into SuperGen as Ariana then moves into working with the CFD modelers here with Tim and Richard. We look forward to seeing that happening in the next few months. So thank you all for listening.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much to everyone to be here as well. Yeah, thank you both of you for really fascinating talks, and I look forward to seeing how the work progresses as well, integration with the other aspects of SuperGen. But before we all go, let me just let you know about the next webinar, which will be hosted on the 8th of May, online webinar again. This time we're going to hear from the University of Exeter, Phil Tees and Ed Mackay will be talking about dynamic cables. So please do join us again for the next webinar on the 8th of May. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.